Hey, Dustin. Thank you for having me on your interview here, and I'm really excited about the subject here. Why supply chain analytics really matter? And first, why is it difficult to make sense of big data? I think that I would like to start in another end and say that it's great with big data, because now we got data on a detailed level, we got the computer power to process the data, and that means that we can actually, close to when things are occurring, establish what is reality, and we don't have to rely on established truths that very often turn out to not be truths, but rather to be company myths. But the risk here is that with all this beautiful data available, it is very easy to get carried away. And it's also a risk that the data is available to a lot of people. And everyone that has the availability, they can draw their own conclusions. And that is why the data needs to be curated. It needs to be handled by someone that has the expertise and the knowledge about the operation. Because otherwise, the conclusions that anyone with access to the data are drawing might very well be wrong. And you're comparing apples to pineapples. And we know from established Davis database, where we've been following up logistics costs and services for almost 40 years, that you really got to know what is comparable and what is not. It's not fair to compare the logistics cost for a high value, low weight item like for pharmaceuticals to an industry like the steel industry, where you have low value and high weight on your items. That makes a lot of difference, and it can give you a problem if you're on the supply chain side of company, because then you will be on the defense all the time and trying to explain why things are right or wrong. And you got to be in command of what is important and what is what. And a difficulty with sorting through the data is that first, the data is never, I would say almost never, clean. Just the fact that you have a lot of data and it looks like it's very accurate and valid doesn't mean that it is. So you need to know and identify the weaknesses of the data, where the master files have been updated and where they haven't, and where you just have a placeholder and where it's real stuff. And the second thing with the clean data is that even if the data is right, it might include extremes and it might include outliers that are distorting the results of the analysis you're making. And that makes that a first step to do, to clean the data, identify the extremes, and know the weaknesses where you can use the data and where it's not valid. Second thing is to decide what is important. Here, it's easy to get lost in a lot of analysis, and you got to know what is really making sense and where you get some output from doing the analysis. And the third step is to make the data comparable. For instance, you've got to make it comparable over time so that you know when the business has changed, and you've got to make adjustments to the trends. Because the trend analysis is the best way of monitoring and identify where your measures to improve efficiency, for instance, are paying off, and where you need to take a closer look. And the second thing is that with the big data, what you want to do is to benchmark between your entities and benchmark externally. And then you got to make the data comparable between the entities. An obvious and small maybe example is when it comes to facilities. The cost to house the inventory, where you might own some of the facilities yourself and you might rent some of the facilities, and the actual cost that you should use might be the same, but the self-owned can come out very favorably in a straight comparison. So here you might want to create a fictional rent to level the playing field. The third question here about what types of analysis needs to be done and why is, of course, depending on the needs. What stage are you in? Are you selling a random company? Are you just keeping an eye on a well-functioning company? Have you had any mergers and so on? But the first area you want to look at is the cost and efficiency area. And we tend to start out by looking at the logistic cost and the structure per item, per customer, and per suppliers, and we look at the order structure. And what we try to look at is what is driving costs. And by applying some rule of thumb or detailed knowledge that we have from other analysis, we can identify which items are profitable, which customers should we focus on, what suppliers do we have agreements with that makes the landed cost higher than we thought it would be. And if we know this, we can then make strategies for how we handle customers. It might be, which is often the case, that we have an order structure where we have a lot of small orders, but the handling cost for those small orders make them unprofitable. And knowing that, then we can find different ways to automate that, or have free freight limits, or have a handling charge. There are a lot of ways that you can use this knowledge. And if you look at the suppliers, very often you find that it's getting a bit pointing in all directions. You have a lot of small suppliers, and it might make sense to have someone that is a bit more expensive, but where the logistics are very efficient and very favorable for you. When we look at efficiency, we of course focus on the handling cost and the facility cost. We're looking at picking, receiving, administration. And in this case, we want to do trend analysis. We want to do benchmark internally between different entities and different facilities. We want to look at if there is any geographical area or country that is more favorable and more efficient. And when we got this in order, it's very interesting to make an external benchmark. Where are your competitors? And I mentioned earlier on the established Davis database, which is free of charge, and you can get a good handle on how do you match up to your peers. A specific area is the transportation, and this is a cost item that in most companies are mostly external, which means that it's money down on the bottom line. And by analyzing the shipments and the needs for mode, you can find that you can often use cheaper modes. You can find potential consolidation areas, which we know save a lot of money. And again, it's on the bottom line. There are controlling analysis that are possible now that weren't possible a number of years ago. If we stay with the transportation, it used to be that it was impossible to really make a detailed analysis of how the actual freight billing compared to the agreement. But now it's possible. And what we know is that in average, a company gets overbilled by 2 to 4% when you compare the actual shipments to the agreements. And to constantly monitor this and follow up could be something that you outsource, but it's also readily available in logistics control tower, transportation management systems, or you can, in some cases, do it yourself without those analysis tools. And if you're looking at a more strategic level, we were touching on the analysis when it comes to suppliers, order structure, customers, items, assortment analysis. But a very lucrative area to look at is the distribution network analysis. And what you do there is that you look at do I store the right amount of each item to reach a certain service level? Do I store the items where it's most favorable cost-wise? Do I store them where it's easiest and cheapest to ship to the customers? All of this is possible to do with data that is readily available. So when I come down to sum this up, the supply chain analytics that is possible to do now is a great chance for you as a supply chain manager to get into the driving seat. And this area is an area where it's very quantifiable and you can put numbers on it. And if you have the data, you can be in charge, you can define what is important, and you can drive and monitor the efficiency, and you can also be a good customer to the suppliers that are helping. Thank you very much for having me, and I am looking forward to talk to you again. Bye-bye.